If you're going to pay attention to the news, pay attention to these headlines rather than Fat Ass 45's anti-reality. Pumped full of unapproved drugs that are not available to average Americans plus a steroid, Fat Ass 45 mounted the steps of the White House on Monday night. Told Americans not to be afraid of the COVID-19 yet. Tell it to the fucking 250,000 plus dead, you fucking fat fuck. And promised them that he'd beat it, but he hasn't. Um, don't let it dominate you, he said, although the White House has been dramatically changed by his diagnosis and the continued positive test results of all the staffers. In the hours since Fat Ass 45's recorded message, a positive case at the Pentagon, a warning from the Federal Reserve, a rare move against him by social media companies, and a string of bad news in Poland have all conspired against the fog of anti-reality he keeps around him. Um, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, all but implored Americans to social distance and wear a mask to help get COVID under control. Um, a second wave of the coronavirus could more significantly limit the economic activity, and not to mention the tragic effects on lives and well-being. Powell said, meaning managing this risk as the expansion continues will require following medical experts' guidance, including the using masks and social distancing measures. And he said Congress should pass a massive new stimulus measure, and I agree with that part. Powell said Tuesday that the risks of Congress pouring too much stimulus into the economy are far lower than the risk of not doing enough at all. Although government spending is adding to an already sky-high federal budget, lawmakers should act, Powell argued. The U.S. federal budget is on an unsustainable path, and has been for some time. Powell said, but this is not the time to give priority to those concerns. A few hours later, Fat Ass 45 said that he would halt stimulus negotiations until after Election Day. And then because he said that, stocks immediately tumbled. Contradicting Fat Ass 45's warning about a Democratic victory in November, a Goldman Sachs forecasted that a blue wave and unified government would lead to a swifter recovery, and that's despite the likely higher taxes Democrats would push for many Americans. Top U.S. military brass, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, are all in self-quarantine after the vice commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Charles Ray, tested positive for COVID on Monday. That the virus penetrated the Pentagon should not be surprising. The White House has already clearly been the site of a coronavirus outbreak that infected the fat ass, his whore, his staffers, his White House domestic staff, journalists, and others. And why not the Pentagon? But the infection of top members of the military is the factual opposite of Fat Ass 45's projection of strength on Monday. Fat Ass 45 suggested COVID is less deadly than the flu, which was a common argument months ago before hundreds of thousands of Americans had died. Now COVID, which is less than a year old, has killed more Americans than the last 5 flu seasons combined. What Fat Ass 45 said is the opposite of true. The Fat Ass routinely lies or misrepresents things. This is one of the few times during the 2020 Squirrel campaign that he's been called out on it by the social media companies. Facebook removed the post, and Twitter labeled it misleading. He responded by seeming to demand that their exemption to lawsuits for contempt be revoked. That's a good conversation to have and very well worth doing, but he should remember that a fair amount of disinformation is circulated on his behalf. A new CNN poll conducted by SSRS suggests that a lead for Joe Biden, which is 57% to Fat Ass 45's 41%, among likely voters. So basically, Biden's leading by 16 points, basically 57 to 41. Regardless of Biden's national lead, the race for the White House will ultimately come down to a handful of swing states that will drive the outcome in the Electoral College. The former vice president leads in several of those critical backgrounds, but by more what they call a narrow margin than his national advantage. A poll is not a prediction of how the election will ultimately turn out, but instead is a snapshot of the race as it currently stands. Biden's lead is different from basically Hillary Clinton's, according to Harry Enton. Look at Biden's vote percentage. He's at just a little bit north of 50% in the average of all the national polls. Clinton's support was only in the low 40s before the debates. Even Fat Ass 45 is averaging around 43% in the polls, and is getting a higher percentage than he was 4 years ago at this time. But there were a lot more undecided or third-party voters at this point in the 2016 cycle. A little less than 20% of voters were undecided or going. With a third-party candidate today, it's less than 10%. 9 and 10 voters have already made up their minds about the election, according to the data. CNN's Matt Egan points out that the two candidates are essentially even in CNN's poll on who can be better at handling the economy. The findings represent a sharp drop in support for Fat Ass 45 and what he previously been his greatest strength. He wrote, yeah, basically the economy, but basically Fat Ass 45's strength in the economy has vanished because of how bad it's going now. Biden gave a speech the other day at Gettysburg about the soul of the nation and racial inequality, and promising to be a president who unites people. The actual Gettysburg Address, which was delivered by Abraham Lincoln in November of 1863, is notable for its unifying content, but also for its brevity. Here's hoping that U.S. politicians today can learn to cram something meaningful and memorable into 270 or so words in about 3 minutes. On Instagram, basically, this person had posted two images of the Nicolay copy, one of 5 known copies of Lincoln's speech, and the one most likely to be a pre-delivery draft, according to the Library of Congress online exposition. John George Nicolay was Lincoln's private secretary, and the executive mansion mentioned on page 1 is in the White House. The 2 pages don't exactly match. One is on the aforementioned stationery, and the other is on a drafting paper. The end of one page doesn't match up with the words in the second either. It is thought that Lincoln rewrote the last paragraph in Gettysburg before giving the speech on November 19, 1863. The last paragraph is where he called for a new birth of freedom, something that we didn't completely achieve in the intervening 157 years since it was written. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, Ryan by Mike, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when the new video comes out, and thanks for listening.